A young man is on his way to the most important job interview of his life at one of the city's most powerful financial firms. But when a violent storm hits and he happens to come across an elderly man struggling with a flat tire on the side of the road, he doesn't hesitate to stop and help, causing him to miss the interview he had worked so hard to earn. Just when it seems like everything is lost, he has no idea that this single act of integrity is about to open a door he never could have imagined. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Ray Thompson stood before the mirror in his small studio apartment on the edge of New Crest, his hands adjusting the knot of his tie for what had to be the 5th time that morning. His reflection stared back at him. 24 years old, tall and lean, with thoughtful eyes that tried to mask the undercurrent of anxiety running just beneath the surface. He exhaled slowly, willing his nerves to settle, but the anticipation in his chest only grew tighter with each passing minute. His navy blue suit, bought second-hand and tailored with money saved from 2 years of part-time jobs, clung neatly to his frame. It wasn't brand new, but it was sharp enough to make a statement. "I belong here," it said. And today, that was the message he needed the world to believe. He turned slightly, adjusting the sleeves. The suit had been a gift to himself, a promise of transformation, a symbol of all the long nights balancing finance textbooks and cappuccino orders behind the counter at Brewhouse Cafe. It was the most expensive thing he owned, and this morning it wasn't just a suit, it was armor. "Sterling and Rowe Capital," he whispered, as if saying the name out loud would make it more real. The email had arrived 2 weeks earlier, and he'd reread it at least 100 times since. An invitation to interview at one of the top financial firms in the city, a company that didn't usually look beyond Ivy League resumes or legacy applicants. Gray had no rich uncles, no boarding school pedigree, no trust fund, just a perfect GPA from Michigan State, a polished resume, and a glowing letter from Professor Delaney, his mentor, and one of the few people who'd ever told him he had what it took to change the world of finance. For Gray, this wasn't just an interview. It was the interview, the one shot to cross that invisible line that divided kids from working-class neighborhoods like Brookview from the suited-up professionals gliding through marble lobbies downtown. His mother, a night-shift nurse who raised him alone since he was 6, had always told him he was meant for more. And standing here now, tie finally straight, he wanted to believe she was right. Gray reached for his leather portfolio, carefully packed the night before. Inside were extra copies of his resume, handwritten notes on macroeconomic trends, prep answers to behavioral questions, and a market analysis he'd created specifically for this role, on the off chance he'd get a moment to showcase his initiative. He slid it under his arm and turned back one last time, scanning the room. His bed was still unmade, the kitchenette spotless, the same motivational poster on the wall he'd hung 2 years ago. Earned, not given. The train ride into City Center moved with the same predictable rhythm it always had. Metal wheels clacking against the tracks, the occasional hiss of brakes, the low murmur of early commuters clutching coffees and scrolling through their phones. Gray sat quietly near the door, his portfolio clutched to his chest like a shield. Eyes fixed on the window, though the tunnel offered no view. When the train surfaced above ground near Lexington Avenue Station, Gray finally saw the city in all its morning energy. But something else caught his attention. Clouds. Thick, fast-moving, and darker than he remembered the forecast promising. The platform was still dry, but a wind had picked up, curling around his legs as he exited. He tightened his grip on the portfolio and pulled his collar up slightly. It was 8:01 a.m., plenty of time, he thought, just 6 blocks to the Sterling Building. Even if he slowed down, he'd make it before 8:30, perfect. He reached the first crosswalk and stepped off the curb just as the first drop of rain hit his cheek. 1 drop, then 2, then a misting wave across his glasses. Within seconds, the sky opened up without warning. Rain poured with a fury that turned umbrellas inside out and sent people scattering beneath awnings and bus shelters. It was the kind of downpour that came with warning sirens on the news. not a light mention in a weather app. The clouds above had turned the entire sky an angry shade of charcoal, and a low rumble of thunder cracked across the skyline, so loud that Gray felt it echo in his chest. "No, no, no," he muttered, quickening his pace, his polished dress shoes slipping slightly on the soaked concrete. He angled his body to shield his portfolio, holding it against his chest beneath his jacket, though both were already beginning to soak through. Everything inside that case, his future, his work, the evidence of his preparation, could be ruined by water in seconds. He needed to find shelter. 3 blocks in, he spotted a coffee shop glowing dimly behind foggy windows, and ducked inside, joining the small crowd of wet strangers all seeking refuge. The inside was cramped, warm, smelling of burnt espresso and damp wool. He moved to a corner near the window, peeled off his jacket, and shook it out as best he could without splashing anyone. His shirt clung to his back, cold and sticky, and he could feel water soaking through the shoulders of the case. He carefully unzipped it, checking the papers inside. Damp at the edges, but not destroyed. Not yet. The barista behind the counter, a woman in her early 30s with short curls and a nose ring, glanced out the window and muttered, "They're saying this is the worst storm we've had in 5 years. Might flood down by the financial district." Gray froze. The financial district, Sterling and Rowe's headquarters, stood right at the edge of it. He glanced at the clock behind the register. 8:10 a.m. Still enough time if the rain stopped. But it didn't. It intensified. Through the glass, Gray watched as leaves and street flyers were ripped from benches and tossed through the air like confetti. Gutters overflowed, turning sidewalks into shallow rivers. He pulled out his phone and opened the rideshare app, praying for one available car nearby. Nothing. He refreshed, still nothing. He switched apps, checked the taxi service, also nothing. The storm had paralyzed the city, and no one was driving through this mess unless they had to. 8:26 a.m. Panic started to slither in. The kind of panic that comes with a voice in your head asking if this is how your shot ends, not because you weren't good enough, not because you didn't prepare, but because of something as stupid and uncontrollable as the weather. Gray zipped the portfolio, shoved his wet jacket back on, and pushed through the crowd toward the door. The rain met him like a slap to the face, cold and aggressive, but he didn't stop. He ran. Splashing through puddles that now reached his ankles, he darted past stalled cars and other pedestrians huddled under scaffolding. His shoes, shined to perfection just an hour ago, now squeaked with every step. His shirt was soaked through, his tie clung to his chest like it had melted there. The pages in his portfolio had begun to curl from moisture, and all the perfect formatting, the clean lines, the work he'd done to stand out, were bleeding ink. By 8:50 a.m., he still had nearly a mile to go. He turned a corner and spotted a taxi letting out a passenger just ahead. Heart hammering, Gray sprinted through the storm, waving an arm, calling out, hoping, only to watch as another man dove into the cab and slammed the door just as Gray reached it. The taillights blinked, and the car pulled away through the waterlogged street, leaving Gray standing in the middle of the intersection, soaked, furious, heart sinking like a weight in his chest. He checked his phone again. 9:05 a.m. His carefully calculated time cushion was gone. The perfect image he had worked so hard to create, gone. The streets of New Crest had turned against him, and yet he kept moving forward, jogging now, half walking, half running, dodging trash bins knocked over by the wind. Cars honked and puddles splashed against his legs. His shoulders ached, his chest burned, but still he kept going. Because this interview was more than a job. It was a doorway, and he couldn't bear to think it might already be closed. Gray skidded to a stop near the edge of the sidewalk, eyes darting toward the sound. A few yards off the main road, just past a toppled trash bin and beneath the flickering streetlight, stood an older man beside a sleek jet-black Lincoln sedan. His hands were shaking visibly, his jacket soaked, sliding on the slippery pavement. He was struggling to lift a spare tire out of the trunk. Gray looked at the man. Then he looked back at the Sterling and Rowe Tower. He could see it. He was so close. The lobby lights glowed warm even through the storm. It was 9:18 a.m. His interview was in 12 minutes. He'd already lost his margin, but he still had a shot, if he kept moving. He could still be there by 9:25, 10 minutes late, but maybe, just maybe, they'd understand. His breath came heavy, the rain still slamming against his shoulders. His mind was screaming, "Keep going." His ambition was roaring. Every instinct told him to push forward, to let someone else deal with the old man. There were always others, weren't there? But the street was empty. Everyone else had vanished into buildings and under awnings. The few people who passed moved quickly, heads down, avoiding eye contact, avoiding responsibility. The old man was alone. Gray closed his eyes, and for a split second he was back in his kitchen at 14, sitting at the table while his mother scolded him for ignoring a neighbor who needed help carrying groceries. "You don't help people only when it's convenient," she'd said. "You help them because that's who you are. That's how you build a life you're proud of, even when no one's watching." He opened his eyes again, jaw tight. He already knew what he was going to do. He jogged over, the cold water splashing up his shins, and stopped just short of the man, raising his voice to be heard over the rain. Sir, let me help you with that." The old man looked up, startled. His eyes were watery and tired, but his expression shifted immediately from frustration to visible relief. "Oh, thank heavens. I thought I could manage it, but this blasted jack keeps slipping. My driver's out sick, and I didn't think the weather would turn this nasty." Gray nodded, setting his portfolio gently in the open back seat, praying it wouldn't get too much worse than it already was. Then he peeled off his ruined jacket, laid it on the ground without hesitation, and knelt down beside the car. "You really shouldn't be out in this kind of storm," Gray said, examining the jack and positioning it correctly beneath the frame. The metal was slippery, cold as ice under his fingers, but his hands moved with confidence. "Storm caught everybody off guard," the old man replied, watching him carefully. "I haven't missed a day in the office in 43 years. Not about to let a little water stop me now." His tone was dry, but Gray caught something in it, a mix of pride, stubbornness, and a hint of curiosity. "You seem to be in quite a hurry yourself," the man added. Gray gave a tight, polite smile, never stopping his work. "Had an interview, important one." "Ah," the man said, nodding slowly, "and yet here you are, helping an old fool with a flat tire." Gray tightened the jack, braced the base with his knee, and glanced up. "You're not a fool, sir. Anyone can get a flat, and no one else was stopping." The man looked at him for a long second, then said softly, "That may be true, but it doesn't make what you did any less rare." Within minutes, Gray had the damaged tire off and the spare mounted. Years of helping his uncle at the local auto shop every summer came back like muscle memory. His hands were covered in grease, rain, and grime. His once crisp white dress shirt was now nearly translucent and clinging to his skin. As he tightened the lug nuts, the old man stood just beneath the trunk door, slightly shielded from the rain. "You know your way around a wrench," he observed. "Not something I often see in young people anymore." Gray laughed despite himself. "My uncle wouldn't let me drive his old pickup until I could change a tire in under 10 minutes. Said it was a life skill." The man chuckled. "Sounds like a wise man." Then his expression turned thoughtful. "Where did you say this interview was?" "Sterling and Row," Gray said without looking up. "Just a few blocks from here." There was a flicker across the man's face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. "I know it," he said carefully. "Tough firm, hard to even get in the door." Gray nodded, finishing up the job. "Yes, sir, which is why I'm probably going to miss my chance." "Even after all this," the man asked, "you still plan to go?" "Of course," Gray said, standing and wiping his hands uselessly on his soaked slacks. "I have to try." He retrieved his portfolio from the back seat, brushing off what moisture he could, then reached for his jacket. It was ruined, muddy, wet, and heavy, but he slipped it on anyway. "Let me at least give you a ride," the old man said, gesturing to the now functional car. "It's the least I can do." Gray hesitated, glancing at his watch. 9:33 a.m. The interview had started 3 minutes ago, but if he got there and explained, maybe, just maybe, there was still a sliver of a chance. "I'd appreciate that," he said finally, and climbed into the passenger seat, trying not to drip too much onto the leather interior. The old man started the engine, pulled smoothly into traffic, and merged onto the main road as if he'd done it 1,000 times. "Name's Howard," he said casually. "Howard Reese." "Gray. Gray Thompson?" he replied, watching the rain slide down the windows. "Well, Gray Thompson," Howard said with a glance, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Sometimes life throws a test at you when you least expect it, and you passed one today, whether you realize it or not." Gray didn't respond. He was too busy staring through the windshield at the glowing silhouette of the Sterling building, as it emerged once again from behind the fogged glass, both closer and somehow further away than it had ever felt. The rain had begun to ease by the time Howard's sedan pulled up in front of the Sterling and Row Capitol building. The storm had broken, leaving behind puddles like mirrors across the polished stone plaza and a thick humidity that clung to the skin. The towering glass structure loomed above them, its steel and glass frame reaching into the clearing sky like a monument to power, wealth, and everything Gray had fought to touch. He stepped out of the car slowly, portfolio in hand, his jacket heavy on his shoulders, each step in his waterlogged shoes releasing a damp squish that made him wince. The building's wide glass entrance reflected the disheveled young man he had become, his suit wrinkled, shirt transparent and stained, hair plastered to his forehead. He looked like someone who had lost a fight with the city and barely crawled away. "Thank you for the ride, sir," Gray said, leaning slightly toward the window, "and for understanding why I had to stop." Howard nodded, his gaze steady and unreadable. "Character reveals itself in moments of inconvenience, Gray. Never forget that." Then, without another word, the sedan slipped back into the thinning traffic, leaving Gray to face whatever came next, alone. Inside, the building's grand lobby was a different world, clean, sleek, almost silent except for the soft tapping of polished shoes and the quiet hum of climate control. The marble floors reflected chandeliers and abstract lighting fixtures. Gray crossed the space cautiously, every step leaving a small puddle in his wake. He could feel the eyes on him, security, receptionists, even a sharply dressed woman exiting an elevator who did a quick double-take at the sight of his soggy form. Still, he kept his chin high. He approached the main security desk, a sleek white counter manned by a tall man in a navy blazer who gave him a mildly alarmed look. "Good morning," Gray began, forcing his voice into something close to composed. "My name is Gray Thompson. I had a 9:30 interview with Sterling and Row's finance division." The man scanned a digital list, then nodded slowly. "Yes, Mr. Thompson, you're on the schedule. That would have been with the HR team on the 14th floor, though, I should warn you, they're pretty strict about timing." "I understand," Gray said with a faint nod. If there's any way I can explain what happened." The guard gestured toward the elevator bank. "You can try, but I can't promise anything." With a quiet "thank you," Gray made his way across the lobby, each squelch of his shoes echoing slightly against the stone, a humiliating reminder of everything that had gone wrong. The elevator ride was almost too quick. As the numbers ticked upward, Gray caught a glimpse of his reflection in the polished doors. Damp, tired, and still visibly rattled, but there was a resolve in his eyes now too, something deeper than desperation. He had made a choice that morning, and even if it had cost him everything, he knew it had been the right one. The 14th floor opened into a corporate waiting area with dark hardwood floors, tasteful art, and soft lighting that felt expensive. Behind the large reception desk sat a woman in her 30s with sharp cheekbones and an immaculately tailored blazer, typing briskly before she glanced up and then paused, clearly surprised at Gray's appearance. He approached with as much dignity as he could muster. "Good morning," he said again. "I'm Gray Thompson. I had an interview scheduled at 9:30 this morning. I know I'm late, and I sincerely apologize. There was an elderly man, he had a flat tire in the storm, and I couldn't just leave him there alone." She raised one perfectly manicured hand to stop him mid-sentence, her expression polite but firm. "Mr. Thompson, I do see you were scheduled this morning with Mr. Calloway. Unfortunately, your interview time has passed, and Mr. Calloway has moved on to other candidates." "I understand," Gray said quickly. "I know how this must look. But if there's any way, 5 minutes, to just explain what happened, I've prepared for months." "I'm sorry," she said, her voice softening slightly, though her stance didn't. "Mr. Calloway is fully booked until this afternoon, and then in meetings until close. He was very clear about his expectations. Punctuality is paramount here." Gray's shoulders sagged, just slightly. "Would you at least tell him that I came? That I tried?" He reached into his case, pulled out one of the few pages that had survived mostly intact, a slightly damp, corner-curled copy of his resume, and handed it to her with quiet care. "I'd be grateful if you gave him this." "I will," she said gently. "I promise." Her eyes lingered on him for a moment longer than expected, as if she could see the story behind the soaked clothes and tired face. "These things happen," she added, almost sympathetically. "There will be other opportunities." Gray smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you," he said, voice barely above a whisper. He turned back toward the elevators, each step a little heavier now. The ding of the arriving elevator echoed like a cruel punctuation mark to the morning's unraveling. As he descended, he allowed himself a moment, a brief, bitter silence, to feel the sting of it all. He had done everything right, worked, sacrificed, believed, and in the end it wasn't enough. Not today. The lobby felt colder the second time around. More sterile. The sunlight had started to pierce through the clouds, warm against the glass, shining down on a soaked young man who had stepped out into the day believing he was about to change his life, only to discover that even doing the right thing sometimes came with no reward. Gray didn't cry. He didn't rage. He simply walked back out into the city, shoes squishing against the pavement, dreams dripping from the edges of his jacket like rainwater. The next morning, the sky was now a deceptively bright blue over Newcrest, as if the city itself had no memory of the chaos it had unleashed the previous morning. In his cramped apartment, Gray sat hunched over his aging laptop, the screen casting a pale blue glow across his tired face as he made yet another revision to his resume. The leather portfolio, now dry but permanently warped at the edges, lay beside him like a wounded soldier returned from war. Hanging on the closet door was his suit, freshly dry-cleaned but still bearing the faint, ghostly outline of rainwater stains that no solvent could completely erase. He stared at it as he worked, the once pristine garment now a silent reminder of both his ambition and its undoing. His phone buzzed, rattling softly against the scratched wood of the table. His mother's face filled the screen. Gray hesitated. He hadn't told her what had happened yet, not the full story. She'd been so proud, so excited when he called to say he'd gotten the interview. She'd even mailed him a pair of cufflinks that had belonged to his grandfather. Gray had worn them that day, tucked into the cuffs of a shirt that had clung to his back like wet paper by the time he reached the building. He swallowed, composed his voice, and answered. "Hey, Ma." "Baby, I've been thinking about you all morning. How's the job search going? Any updates from that big interview?" Gray opened his mouth to respond, to tell her the truth, that the interview never really happened, that he'd missed it by minutes after helping a stranger who might not even remember his name. But before he could speak, another call cut in, flashing across the top of his screen. "Unknown number, Newcrest area code." "Ma, I think I have to take this," he said quickly, the weight in his chest rising with cautious hope. "Could be about a job. I'll call you back?" "Of course, honey. Go get 'em." He switched lines and cleared his throat. "Hello, this is Gray Thompson." "Mr. Thompson," came a voice, crisp and professional, female. "My name is Catherine Ellis. I'm the executive assistant to Mr. Howard Sterling, CEO of Sterling & Rowe Capital. I'm calling to invite you to a meeting this afternoon at 2 p.m. if you're available." Gray blinked. For a moment he was certain he'd misheard. Yes, I'm available, absolutely, but I thought I missed. Wasn't the interview earlier this week?" There was a pause. "I don't have details regarding your previous appointment," Catherine said smoothly. "I was simply instructed to extend this invitation. You'll be meeting Mr. Sterling directly on the executive floor, 82nd level. Would you like directions to the building?" "No, thank you," Gray said automatically, his voice barely keeping up with the firestorm of thoughts now cascading through his mind. "I know where it is." "Excellent. We look forward to seeing you then." The line disconnected, and Gray sat in stunned silence. Gray shot up from his chair, nearly knocking over his coffee mug. He had less than 3 hours. This time there would be no rainstorm, no mud-streaked pants or frantic sprint through chaos. This time he would arrive early, prepared, and dry. He pulled his suit from the door, smoothed out the sleeves, checked the cuffs. The cufflinks were still there, silver and simple, gleaming quietly under the morning light. He reached for them with hands that now trembled not from doubt but from anticipation. The storm had taken his opportunity, but maybe, just maybe, it had also delivered him something far greater. He wasn't going to miss it twice. At exactly 1:17 p.m., Gray stepped out of a yellow cab and onto the dry, sunlit pavement in front of the Sterling and Rowe Capitol building. The air was crisp, the storm of 3 days ago now a distant memory washed clean by spring sunlight. The plaza gleamed beneath his polished shoes, newly cleaned and shined to a mirror finish, the same pair that had been soaked through in his last attempt to enter this place. But today was different. Today he wasn't fighting the city. He wasn't running against time. Today he had been invited. He approached the same security desk, and the same man looked up with polite curiosity. Gray offered a slight nod. "Gray Thompson, I have an appointment at 2.80 second floor." The guard's brows lifted subtly, then he checked the digital log. "You're cleared, Mr. Thompson. Executive access." He handed Gray a black access badge with a gold emblem that shimmered under the lights. "Elevators to your right. Press E82. As the elevator began its ascent, Gray took a slow breath and stared at his reflection in the doors again. He looked sharp, ready, composed. But beneath it all, his thoughts raced. Why him? Why now? Was this a courtesy meeting, a polite rejection from a powerful man who happened to feel guilty, or was it something else entirely? When the doors opened, he stepped into a different world. The 82nd floor didn't resemble an office so much as a modern sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched the length of the hallway, offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the city skyline. The carpet beneath his feet was thick and silent, muffling his steps. Real artwork, not prints but original pieces, lined the walls, and the furniture was minimal, expensive, and perfectly placed. Every detail screamed precision, power, taste. "Mr. Thompson?" A warm voice greeted him from his right. A woman in her 40s, elegant in a tailored navy suit, approached with a poised smile. "I'm Catherine Ellis. We spoke earlier. Mr. Sterling will see you shortly. May I offer you a glass of water or coffee while you wait?" "Water would be great, thank you," Gray said, his voice steady though his palms had gone slightly damp. Catherine returned within seconds, offering him a crystal glass so pristine it sparkled like it had never been touched. She gestured toward a set of wide double doors at the end of the corridor. "When he's ready, I'll let you know. Please, make yourself comfortable." Then she moved with practiced grace back to her desk, leaving Gray standing in front of the doors that separated him from the man at the center of this unfolding mystery. "Mr. Sterling will see you now," Catherine said gently, interrupting his thoughts. Gray turned and followed her toward the grand doors. She knocked twice, then opened one side and stepped slightly inside. "Mr. Thompson is here, sir," a voice answered, rich and familiar. "Send him in, Catherine." She held the door open for him, and as Gray stepped through, his breath caught. The office was vast and filled with sunlight. The far wall was entirely glass, overlooking the city like a command center. The decor was understated but exquisite, dark wood, leather, and marble, arranged with the ease of someone who didn't need to prove anything. A large desk sat facing the view, and behind it, in a high-backed leather chair, sat a man turned away, looking out over the city. Slowly, the chair rotated, and when their eyes met, Gray felt a shock ripple through him like electricity. Howard Sterling smiled gently from behind the desk, same silver hair, same thoughtful gaze. Same man he had helped beneath a pouring sky while watching his future slip further away with each tick of the clock. "Hello again, Mr. Thompson," Sterling said, rising to his feet with quiet strength. "I believe we have a conversation to finish." Gray stood frozen for a moment, his mind scrambling to fully comprehend the truth he had only begun to suspect. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't charity. This man, the CEO of Sterling and Rowe, one of the most powerful figures in global finance, had orchestrated this, had seen him. I had no idea," Gray finally said, his voice low. "That," Sterling replied, stepping around the desk to meet him, "is exactly what made it matter." He extended a hand. Gray took it, the handshake firm, warm, and grounding. The storm outside had ended days ago, but the storm inside him, the one made of doubt and fear and the weight of years spent trying to break into a world that rarely let people like him in, was finally beginning to lift. And something else was rising in its place. Possibility. Howard Sterling gestured toward a pair of sleek leather chairs arranged across from his desk, and Gray moved carefully, settling into one with measured disbelief still etched across his face. The CEO remained standing for a moment, walking slowly to the tall windows behind his desk, hands clasped behind his back, gaze cast over the city that pulsed and shimmered beneath them. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, thoughtful, with the weight of years folded neatly into every word. 58 years ago, he began, I stood on a factory floor in a town no one outside of Pennsylvania had ever heard of, wearing a cheap suit 2 sizes too big, holding a portfolio I'd borrowed from my brother. I walked into a bank, asked for a loan I had no business getting, and tried to convince a man 3 times my age to invest in a vision I couldn't fully articulate yet. He turned slightly, offering Gray a small smile. He said, yes, changed my life. The company you're sitting in right now wouldn't exist without that chance. Gray listened quietly, his body tense but his mind now racing less with anxiety and more with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in days. Hope. Sterling moved back to his desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a familiar item, Gray's weather-worn leather portfolio. You left this in the back seat of my car. I took the liberty of looking through it. He slid it across the desk. Your analysis on emerging markets in Southeast Asia is sharp, forward-thinking, and this cover letter? It's not just polished, it's personal. It tells me who you are. Gray reached for the portfolio, his fingers brushing against the warped leather. Thank you, sir, He hesitated, uncertain how to bridge the chasm between them, between their worlds. I was afraid you'd think I was unprofessional for missing the interview. Sterling leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. I won't pretend this company doesn't value punctuality or polish or preparation. We do. But what that storm gave me, Gray, was a rare gift, something no resume, no recommendation letter, no GPA can reveal. He paused, then spoke with quiet emphasis. It showed me your character. The words hung between them, simple and profound. Most people, standing where you were, feet soaked, heart racing, dream in sight, would have kept walking. Not because they're bad people, just because they're scared, hungry, desperate, focused on the goal. But you stopped. You looked. You chose to act, even when it cost you something. That tells me more about who you are than any interview could. Gray sat back slightly, his heart full and heavy all at once. I've always believed that if I just worked hard enough, prepared well enough, someone would notice, but after that morning, I started to think maybe the world didn't care. Sterling's eyes softened. The world rarely notices, Gray, but the right people do. He circled back to the desk and extended his hand once again. Gray Thompson, I'd like to offer you a position at Sterling & Rowe, not as an analyst in the entry-level program, but as my special assistant. Gray stared at him, the words seemed to hang in the air like mist. Special assistant? He echoed. But I don't have the experience. I'm not from... Sterling raised a hand. You have exactly the experience I'm looking for. You understand what it means to work hard, to carry weight without complaint, to make decisions when no one's watching. I can teach finance. I can't teach character. He walked to the window, looked out over the city again. You'll sit in on meetings, travel with me, learn from the top, not the bottom. It won't be easy. You'll be in rooms where no one looks like you. You'll hear things you don't fully understand, at first. But if you're willing to work, to listen, to grow, you'll come out of it with a foundation most people spend a decade trying to build. Gray rose slowly, the enormity of what was being offered settling over him like a second skin. Sir, why me? Sterling turned, and for the first time his smile widened with something close to warmth. Because someone once believed in me before I earned it, and now it's my turn to do the same. Gray reached out and shook the man's hand, this time not as a stranger offering roadside help, but as a future shaped by mutual respect and hard-earned trust. The rainstorm hadn't ended his opportunity. It had revealed it. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.